Hey there, everyone. I'm Startacker. I'm the designer and developer for November 26th. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the sort of a technical work that went into this. Because I think that's the most interesting part of this is just how everything got pieced together, how it all works internally. So that's what I'm going to be talking about. There's not too much intro that needs to be done here. It's really is just let's take a look. The first thing I did is, well, the first thing that happens, the player spawns here, then the intro plays, which I'll show. The intro is actually stored in this little box down here. It's completely part of a world, because that's just how Source works. So there's two brushes here. This one that has my name on it is only enabled during the outro. During the intro, it just says this. How this works is that this logic auto is controlling everything. You can open it up, you can see that. So what happens is once the map loads, this camera here is enabled, and that takes over the view of the player. It is moving along a track that is these 2 points. So you get a little bit of a zoom in effect as it's going from here to here. This second camera is actually for the outro, and it's set up like that because it doesn't move. And so the benefit of that is I don't have to worry about where the first camera is at all, because these cameras can be a little bit buggy in their movement. So rather than worrying about that, I just decided not to. There's 3 fades to control the fade in, fade out. The first one is enabled on map start, so that fades in. Then it fades out of the intro, then it fades into the map. These are set up and timed, so it is seamless from here. And that's it for this here. Now we can go into the real meat and potatoes of this. So as soon as the player... Okay, let's talk about the view model and world model of the scanner. The scanner is just part of the map, and this is actually a trick I used on Snowden. So rather than like setting up a new weapon, it's just what if I parent it to the player, and that works more than enough well. So this camera prop here is actually parented to the player. It says that the parent here, but it's actually set to parent itself to the player as pretty much as soon as the map loads. It's 1/100th of a second off, but that should be good enough. Using a map-based feature, it's also set to disable drawing. What this does is rather than unload it from the map, it just unloads its rendering. So it's still there and it's still attached to the player. They just can no longer see it. As I had mentioned, this is something unique to map-based. There's a number of things done here that are unique to map-based. I highly recommend map-based. So this is parented to the player. This is a view model. This is what you see as you're going around the house. This is a parent of a player, and it's set to disappear. There is the world model for the car right in here. Oh, if I can get selected. It's just a funk brush. There's a light on top of it, just so you can see it better. There is a button on top of it, which controls the actual picking up of the camera. It's set to unlock. The 16-second delay is as soon as the map starts, so it's timed after the intro. Once the button is used, the world model is killed because it's no longer needed. The view model is enabled to draw. You get the sound effect that you get when picking up ammo. It ends the hint here. This is another map-based feature that tells the player to pick up the camera. It tells it to stop showing that. It unlocks a front door, and it shows the hint about inspecting over the house. So that's all done through this button here. When you first load into the map, the front door is locked. The player cannot enter it. They can walk around it and sort of see into it, but they can't do anything else. So that's that. We have a few more miscellaneous entities here, which I'll go over real quick. This is just an autosave. Nothing special about that, just to save the game. This is a speed mod here. Player's speed mod is an entity that controls really a bunch. It controls a bunch of mechanics that the player could or couldn't have. What it's useful for is disabling specific things. So I disable the HUD and I disable jumping. So if a player cannot jump, they don't need to jump, but the player can no longer jump. And the player no longer has the crosshairs that they would have. This also has the added benefit of removing the fire flash damage. As that does get a little bit in the way. I'm not too huge of a fan of that. So this just works out pretty well. There's a game UI here. We'll go over that in a moment. This is the client command to send the player back to the main menu. So nothing too exciting there. There's a soundscape here. Players right here. There's everything here is now done for the intro, and we can talk about actually entering the house. But so the house is a mess. I hope it's at least like you can't really see much from any viewport anymore, but I can at least explain it using graphics. When the player enters the house, nothing special happens. The player is free to roam around the first and second floor as they please. And that's it. That's all they really can do. All of the actual placement points are locked until what I call the hunt begins. And that's it. The main things that start to happen are on the second floor. I believe it's this trigger. Yes, it's this trigger. So this trigger tells the game, hey, we're going to start the hunt now. Once the player reaches this trigger, it's like, okay, let's set up the house for that. It does a few things. I'll actually open it back up so I can show that. The first thing it does is it tells the front door to disallow the player to use it. I believe this is another map-based feature, so that's very useful. It spawns all of the internal names are man, but it spawns the first shadow entity stuff, which we'll talk about in a moment. If the front door is open, it will close it, and then it enables a bunch of triggers and clips for that. If the hint for looking over the house is still active, it actually ends it. This is because I was doing troubleshooting just in case. Saves the game. The other thing, it turns on a clip to prevent the player from just walking out the door. This was one of the free things I did, disallowing player use to stop the player from exiting. And then 20 seconds afterwards, the car alarm starts to go off. So after 20 seconds, if a player hasn't entered the second stage of the hunt, which is the hunt, if a player hasn't entered it, which is down here, so if a player wanders around on the second floor or in this area and they never actually begin, what happens is that I have the car's alarm to start go off, which is controlled through this sound entity that just plays a looping car alarm sound. There's a logic timer here. What this does is that every half second it tells it to turn off, and then a half second afterwards turns it back on. This is this one right here, the actual spotlight itself. I didn't actually have the headlamps, like the light itself, go off, because there's already a lot of dynamic lights in this map anyway, and I don't like the look of spotlight dynamic lights. So just the headlamps themselves going on and off is noticeable enough. If you never noticed that and then you're finding out about here, then it worked. So good going. So the car alarm starts going off until the second stage of a hunt begins, which is when the player comes back down. Oh yeah, there's a bunch of post-processing effects. We'll go over those too. Those are these two are another map-based feature. When the player, there are two triggers. Here they are. This is the first one. This is the second one. So there's two separate triggers. One in the living room and one in the main hallway. These are what tells the game. This is what tells the game we are beginning the hunt. Start, get everything going. These are two separate triggers, by the way, but entering either one of them causes the other to be disabled. So only one at a time. Only one of them can be enabled. This is primarily just so I can guarantee that the player it has at least a sight line on the door, so they see something coming in. So what it does is it tells the front door to open. The shadow is already spawned, which we'll talk about that in a moment. It essentially tells the shadow it tells the shadow the beginning relay to trigger, which we'll go about that again in a moment. I mentioned I did 3 things. I actually did 4. Here's another very neat map-based feature: set collision group. This is something that allows you to dynamically change the collision grouping on dynamic entities. In this case, 15 is specifically for doors and allows players to pass through, but nothing else. So the player can't get the door stuck open by running into it. So that's how the door is forced to be closed. This entity, there's a clip on it anyway, so the player can never leave. It tells itself to disable itself. It's trigger once anyway. It's just for the second one. It tells the sound effect on the shadow to start playing. It also parents it. Yes, it also parents the box that is used for the shadow, which we'll talk about that. After 6 seconds, once the shadow has entered the map, it tells the front door to close and also lock itself. This is just another measure of defense. Disable player interaction actually makes locking the door needless, but I still did it anyway. After 8 seconds, it shows a hint on how to place cameras. So let's talk about the shadows now. And I need this shadow actually up here. Or, nah, it's the easiest one to probably look at is probably this one. So there are 4 shadows in total in the map. 2 of them come from the front door. One of them comes from here. And then one of them is always in the attic. Actually, no, that one's overlapping. So the first thing we have is obviously the entity itself, which are just they're internally just named man. So go for it. If you want to call them bad, go for it. I'm not going to stop you. A number of things are happening here. So the man entity spawns. There is a spotlight on top of them that is parented to them. So that follows them around. This is the light, the red light that shows up around them. There is a trigger here for the trigger hit. This deals approximately 12.5 damage per half second of being within the trigger. This is that's based on I think fire damage. The fire damage being cut in half, I believe. So 12.5 or approximately 4 seconds within a hurt trigger. And there's a healing entity as well. I'll talk about that too. There's an entity here for a soundscape. There are 2 soundscapes that are triggered through these boxes that are around each shadow. The first one is actually a Citadel soundscape. This was originally only intended to be like a placeholder, but it actually worked out quite well, I think, and it meant that I had to do less work, so I went with that. Then the far away trigger tells it to stop. This isn't perfect. There are situations where the nearby trigger will persist, but I didn't think that was too huge of a drawback, so I decided, you know what, that's fine, whatever. So there's a soundscape trigger box surrounding them that's parented to the shadow. there's a cube on top of them. This cube is important because it's not actually parented to them at all once the map starts. There's a reason for that. We have these 4 templates here. This is what all of the Shadow's entities, each one is stored in. And so when they need to spawn, you know, each one of these is triggered to force spawn them. The issue with that is that the droning sound, which is a looping data transmission sound, I believe from episode 1, what that does, that's doing is that it's using source entity name, which is just it's set to sound proxy, which is the boxes around their heads. The reason why I'm having it set the box heads, they're not included in the template at all. There is a bug with ambient generics where if the entity that an ambient generic is trying to play through doesn't exist at map startup, which is what the templates do, it just won't play the sound. So what happens instead is that the boxes are here in the map at all times. They don't draw any shadows, they don't draw at all, they're not interactable in any way, they're just there. As soon as the shadows spawn, they are parented to the shadows, and then the sound starts playing through the box. So by technicality, this box is always in the map. It never goes away, it's just parented. And so that allows it to move around. And so that's how that's done. That's all of the shadow effects and entities on their own. Let's talk about how they move around the place. So in order to have them move around the place, I think I'll head back up here because no, which one of these is the cleanest? Okay, I think this one because it's the simplest. So when one of the shadows spawns, there is this picker here. This picker is here. Let me go back down here as well. So here's the okay. I'm overcomplicating this. Here we go. This one should just be the first one. So here's the first one. This is the first shadow. There's 8 cases here. So every time this entity is triggered, it will pick one of these random ones, actually through a shuffle. So in an attempt to sort of make sure that it's going through each one. So it's telling it to begin the sequence after 3 seconds of picking one. Each sequence is one of these boxes. It just tells it doesn't do anything special. It just tells that shadow to walk over to it. What then happens next is that there is a trigger multiple on top of every single scripted sequence that is filtered out to just those shadows, except for the last one on the attic, because they're the only one that could be up there. So that just prevents overlapping. So what happens when a shadow enters this trigger? It actually tells all scripted sequences for that shadow to stop. It tells it to cancel them, and then it tells the picker to pick a new scripted sequence, start that one. And then the 3-second delay is just a 3-second delay between them entering this trigger and going to somewhere else. So that's how that works. The success rate on this is mostly good. There are still... I've done a good amount of stuff to try to make this good. I think there are still very rare opportunities for them to get stuck, but that's whatever, honestly. One of the things that I did is I added a pulse. These are called pulses. It essentially is every 15 seconds, once this is enabled, tell the picker, just pick a new one. Just pick a new one and begin it. Because the idea is, this is for the case where the issue isn't while a shadow is going to one place and then going to the other. I believe the first one should prioritize. Either way, it wouldn't matter if a shadow is in transition to one and then it gets told to go to another, because it'll work one of the two out. The thing it's trying to fix here is in the case where a shadow walks into a trigger, somehow all the scripted sequences get canceled, but then nothing actually, it doesn't begin a new one, or it just stops going to one. So the idea is the pulse just cycles through them and it's like, okay, begin this one, okay, begin this one. The success rate on this is also mixed, but it works well enough for it to probably be good. This is one of those cases where it's like, how do you do this and in the cleanest way possible? Because that's kind of hard to do in this situation. I mean, there's totally probably like some easier way to do this, but this is the way that I found within the time constraint that I had. Let's talk about the map events now, and then we'll talk about the cameras. The map events, there are 3 map events. The first is the fastest one. It's the bricked up wall. The second is the windows turning red. And the third is all of the doors opening or closing. All of those are stored right here. So this is I believe this is the window one. What this does is once the hunt begins, this timer is enabled. And so what's actually happening is that there are two trigger multiples in the house. Every time the player walks through that, all 7 of these are triggered. It tells it, run what's in these, but they're set to be disabled, so they don't actually fire anything. It tells it, trigger everything, but it's like, oh, it's disabled, so it doesn't actually do anything. What this timer is doing is that every minute to 2 minutes, it picks a random relay out of this list, tells it to enable that one. So one of these gets enabled, and then once the player walks through that trigger, it makes the window red. It reds out the window. Why it is done in this way is because I wanted the windows to turn red when the player wasn't looking at them. So when the player is, I believe this is a trigger here. No, it's one of them's, no, it's, you can see that like this has become a mess over time. I think this one is one of them. Yes. Wait. Yes, this is one of them. So there's one up here on the second floor to enable ones on the bottom floor. There's one on the bottom floor somewhere here that enables the ones on the top floor, or it triggers the ones on the top floor. So that's just to make sure, and they're placed in a way, and really it's just so that the player doesn't see the windows go red while they're there. I wanted this to be out of the way, and I think ultimately that actually works out quite well. Because I wanted these events to be happening while the player wasn't actually looking at them. The brick wall event is actually on the... that trigger is on the staircase here. How that works is... I believe it's this guy. So what happens is once the hunt begins, there's a 60-second timer. Once the 60-second timer goes, I think these ones are... No. Once the 60 seconds is up, the trigger on the staircase actually enables. And so once that trigger is tripped, one of these 3 cases are sent. And so after that, one of these 3 relays, which these only send out a single output. I could have just done that through the actual entity itself, but I want it to be organized at least as much as possible as I could be. So that just tells one of the 3 brick walls here. This one's my main one, this one's in the foyer, this one's in the kitchen door. Why only one of them is because if you enable 2 of them, then one of the rooms is permanently locked off. So this is just primarily to trip up the player. I want the player to have to take a moment to realize, wait, the layout has changed a little bit. This is harking back to what I originally envisioned this map to be, but the entity I wanted this to do in is only in Portal 2, so whatever. All of the doors opening or closing event is pretty straightforward. After the hunt begins, there's a minute to 2 minute timer that tells this random picker to pick one of these 2, which is another thing that I could have just done through like here, but I didn't want to. So it just tells this all the inside doors to either open or closed using a wild tag or a wild card. So it's like all of these doors. It's all of the doors except for the front door, the back door, and the attic door. Okay, that's all of the events. Let's talk about the cameras, which then we get to talk about the logic L. So, how the cameras work is actually it goes back to this game UI here. So, what this game UI is looking for is every time the player clicks mouse 1. Every time the player clicks mouse 1, it sends off 7 outputs. Every time the player presses mouse 1 can be like that. Like you can imagine that has a little bit of realm of instability, I'd say, but you're not expected to be spamming the left mouse button. So what that's trying to do is it's trying to find all 7 of these. Ignore this having dead outputs. What that's doing is it's sending an input to all 7 of these relays and telling it trigger, go, do it. And they're all set to disable. So this is another thing with like the window relay, but instead it's with the actual triggers. The triggers are enabled with what I call just the entry trigger for them. So when a player enters, these are disabled when the map first starts, and they are enabled once the hunt begins. So the trigger is enabled. Once a player enters one of these triggers, which is on every single paint position, it actually sends an input to the relay to enable itself, and once the player leaves the trigger, it tells it to disable. So how it works is that when mouse 1 is clicked, all 7 of the relays try to fire. They are disabled though. But if they're in one of these triggers, then one of them is enabled, and so it will start that sequence. And the entire sequence is controlled through these relays. We can take a look at what each one of them looks like. And now we can talk about the scanner itself. The scanner itself is stored underneath the map. It's not that gracefully placed underneath the map. This is actually one of those situations where if the camera is facing this way, then you can see a little bit of it on this rock. I didn't feel like that was too important though. So if a camera is actually placed underneath the map, it's always going. It has the projected texture going. It has the spotlight going. So what this does, this is the storage area. When the trigger is, when the relay, when this, I call the scanning sequence. When the scanning sequence is started, this point teleport actually teleports the camera to this position. So there is just one scanner for each position. And so that teleports everything here. Once a sequence is done, it teleports it back to here in what I call storage. So we can take a look at the first one. So it tells it to teleport. It disables the drawing on the view model because you're no longer holding it. it kills the entry trigger, so you can no longer like activate it twice. It plays a sound, which is the tripwire placing sound. It tells this own entity to disable itself, so that's just another layer of please don't ever be enabled ever again. Like, please don't send out anything ever again. It adds a counter to these. It adds one to these two counters here, which we'll talk about. Sends a trigger to what I call the messy relay. It saves the game. It plays the actual it plays another sound of it starting up. The camera head starts rotating here after 3 seconds. It stops rotating after 31 seconds. It plays the stop sound, and then it tells the end trigger to be enabled. So the messy relay is right here. Messy relay and messy relay 2. This is just a very ham-fisted way of doing this, because the way I named these, like, I was thinking, like, uh-oh, I don't think wildcards are going to work here, so I just stuck everything into this trigger here. Basically, what you need to know, when a sequence starts, it tells every other entry trigger to disable itself. So you can't have, like, two scanning sequences going at once. And then once it ends, it tells them all to enable. The thing is how the entry triggers, once they start, are killed, so it wouldn't matter if I'm trying to enable them anyway, because they no longer exist. Once the scanning sequence is finished, there is a end trigger inside of it, which is enabled. Once you touch that, it teleports the primary scanner to the storage. It enables the view model scanner again. It plays the pickup sound, and it fires the relays for the rest of the triggers to be enabled. And so what helps out with this is that I can have one go off, and then I can go to, like, the bedroom go off, and then go to, like, the hallway. The benefit of this is that you can do this in any order. It just works, and I'm quite surprised that all of this just kind of works. Now let's go. Now let's talk about progression. The progression is stored in these 3 counters here. I believe the first counter is the primary counter. So every time a sequence starts, it adds 1 to this counter. Once 6 is hit, which is the 6 primary ones, this enables the attic to open up. So it spawns the shadow in the attic, and it starts having it walk around. It unlocks the attic door after about 30 seconds, opens it after 30 seconds, enables the draw and motion on the broken version of a padlock that's on the door, plays a sound, kills the locked padlock. That was a pretty, that was just how I set that up. I think you can get padlocks to just go to a different model, but I didn't care enough to do that. Counter 2 is for the second shadow that shows up. After 2 scans, it just essentially spawns this guy, has him walk in, the door opens for him, he walks in, the door closes, and that's it. That's just pretty, it's the same thing as the first shadow. It's just a second time on a second event. This is actually done twice. These 2 counters have the same name. This one's just set to 4. So after 4 scans, it spawns the third shadow. It's internally called 4 because that was how the sequence of adding these in was. There's originally just 1 shadow, and the second shadow got added. The third shadow was added on the attic. The 4th shadow was added on the 2nd floor. So this is essentially just the same thing as this one. except it's a lot more simpler because the shadow is just stored in this room here. And this happens as soon as the player starts their fourth scanning. And what works about this is that as soon as the player starts one of their fourth scanning, they have to be in one of the scanning positions. So it doesn't matter that this one spawns within the play space, because the player can't see that happening, and that's all that matters. So after the 6 scans, as I had mentioned, this padlock here disappears, the sound plays, there's a lock in here that enables to show that it's been broken off. This is just for visualization, further visualization purposes. This door opens, so when the player is wandering around, they see, oh, the door is open, so they can go in. There's a ladder here, but ladder's not that great, but I also never really fixed it, so that's all on me. I should have moved it over a little bit to the left, but honestly, I'm just gonna take the L on the ladder being in a very weird position, especially since you can't jump. You have to be crouching to get up here, but you know, whatever. I should have thought one into that, but whatever. I'll take the L on that one. The final scanner is right up here. This one's not too special, except for the end. It's like sort of the same thing as all the other ones. The ending trigger just has Mourn in it. So since this one is the last one, this is guaranteed to be the last one. I don't have to have it in the counter at all. So the scanner storage happens, the view model enabled, the play sound, messy relays done, but then the front door is unlocked. Yeah, the front door is unlocked. The hint that shows up about leaving, that says, you're done, leave, shows up. The end trigger enables, oh yeah, this one is just like precautionary. This one is actually what tells it, leave now. Front door opens, and the cheese prevent the click brush on the front door is disabled. So the player can leave now. They can leave the house. This end trigger fades. You actually use the intro fades. So it fades it to black. It shows the credit, the final credit sequence. We already sort of went over that. And then it tells the game to disconnect to the main menu. That's it. Yeah, we had already mentioned that. This is enabled once you enter the end trigger. And that's it. That's everything that is done for the map. A few other things. Where is it? It's a timer that I have somewhere. No, it's not that one. You don't need to see it anyway. Actually, it might be through the player proxy. No, it isn't, because actually that didn't actually work for what I'm doing. I think it's this one. Yes. What this does, it looks like a broken one, but it's not, trust me. What this does is every 10 seconds add 50 health to the player. So if the player runs into a shadow and they get away, they don't die, because it's relatively easy to avoid them. But if you have like a bad, like, if you like turn a corner and it's like, oh, there they are, and you take a little bit of damage, and yeah, that sucks. But I've also set that up so every 10 seconds you are given 50 health, which is 4 additional hits, which is 2 additional seconds. And so after 20 seconds, you're fully healed. That's primarily just to prevent an issue that I've seen with a few other maps that try to do something like this. Like something sort of similar to this, where a player has one bad and like run-in with the main enemy that deals damage when they are near them. And then they are left with pitiful health. There's no health regen by default in Half-Life 2. You just get left with pitiful health, and it's especially worse that you can't even see it. So that just works to be like just a little bit of health added every 10 seconds, just so the player doesn't, like, it isn't completely destroyed. every like run-in they have afterwards. If they have a single bad one, well, there's a little bit of a saving grace. I think that's really it for everything that's I think actually interesting to talk about on the map. This was this was very different to how I expected this map to play out, but I think ultimately it's a good enough experience. This was a lot of fun to slowly figure out. I think that is really about it. If you enjoyed looking at this, if you've never played November 26th, you can play it in MapLab's upcoming test tube 13, not 15, 13, Tune 2. At the time that I'm recording this, it isn't out. By the time I upload this, it probably won't be out either, but there are your avenues for actually playing this. I'd like to do more dev videos like this in the future for other maps that I will eventually make. So thank you for watching.